Yep.
Super. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and hello to all of you on Facebook who are watching tonight on April 6th, right? Or who may be catching this later on. I'm Audrey Scanlon. I'm the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Central Pennsylvania. And this is a conversation that we're going to have tonight for just an hour, which is about a tenth of the amount of time that we could spend just beginning to dip our toes into this really critical topic of racial reconciliation. But we are eager to share with you where we've been and why we're doing this tonight. And then we'll introduce our guests and get right into it. On Fridays, since the beginning of the pandemic, I've been putting out a short video each week to stay connected with people in our congregations and across the diocese. And it's something that I had to be talked into doing because I'm not a fan of video, but once I started, I found it was a really, really easy and wonderful way to connect to people on a number of different topics. And so this Lent, we've been doing a series called Prayer and Action, and talking about difficult subjects and what I call really critical issues for us to explore. So we started by talking about the war in Ukraine and the subject of war. We moved to talk about divisions across our country and in our family and the importance of reconciliation. We've talked about caring for creation and environmental degradation. And this topic, the topic of racial reconciliation, is I think, one of the most important things that we can do as a church and as people of faith. And we've made it the number one priority in our diocese. In the 5 top things that we're doing for the next 5 years. And I don't think we'll get it all solved in 5 years, but we are running hard at it. And so it's with that we are eager to hear tonight about some work that Dr. Jean Corey has been doing at Messiah University, and to ground us in some of the history of racial oppression and abuse in the city of Harrisburg, which is the sea city of our diocese in central Pennsylvania. And so before we get into a short description that Jean will offer us of her work and then respond to that, I'd love to have you each introduce yourself, tell us how it is that you might be connected to this project. And I'll start with my brother Bishop. Nathan, please introduce yourself.
Well, good evening, all. I am Nathan Baxter, and I am a son of Harrisburg and a son of the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania, having been raised up to be deacon and priest, and then very privileged in 2006 to be elected the 10th bishop. I am one who not only have had rich experience with the dynamics and the demographics of Harrisburg, but also up and down the diocese, having both relatives and friends going all the way up to near the New York border. And so I am very pleased that our diocese is having conversations of this type, because I think that we have an opportunity to be an enormous witness, more than some of the major metropolitan and very urban dioceses, because of the diversity that we have here in economics, in region, in race and culture. So I am delighted. I think that we have a chance not only to be blessed of each other, but to be a tremendous witness within the Episcopal Church. So thank you, Bishop Audrey, for this vision.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here tonight. Shana, you're next on my screen.
Thank you, Bishop Scanlon. Good evening, everyone. I am the Reverend Shana J. Watson. I serve as the Associate Rector at St. James Episcopal Church and the Urban Well here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in the Episcopal Diocese of Central Pennsylvania. And I am also the founder and creator of TheoCon, where theology meets pop culture. And I am delighted to be with you all this evening. Thank you, Bishop Scanlon.
Thank you. Betsy.
Oh, thank you, Bishop Scanlon. Good evening, everyone. I am just delighted to be here with you as well. I am the Reverend Canon Betsy Ivy. I'm Canon for Growth and Support in the Diocese of Pennsylvania. I am here because I was called back to my hometown, born and raised in Harrisburg, PA, by the Lord, and met up with Bishop Nathan Baxter, who raised me up through the process of being called to the priesthood. And I believe that I was the first African-American female to be ordained to the priesthood in the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania. So, that gives me great joy and just a wonderful, just a wonder to be here with you all. I am called into this place right now as a canon to change the church. And I'm delighted that this is to be here and have this opportunity to change the church in this way tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Betsy was in our diocese when I first arrived. I think you were on the search committee, right?
I was on the search committee. I was not going to mention that, but yes, I was very happy to search for you.
Well, but you left as soon as I got here. So let's see, we've got some screen sharing going on.
Oh, sorry. So sorry. I didn't mean to do that.
We're almost there. Sarah Whedon, tell us who you are.
Thank you, Bishop, and good evening. I'm Sarah Whedon. I am chair of the Dismantling Racism in the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania Commission, asked to be part of this group of people that are trying to find a way to bring awareness of the racism that is present in our diocese and has been for some time, and start to find ways that we as white people can address ourselves and make ourselves aware about the issue and start to pick away at the systems that have been for so long. And in any way we can. And we're particularly here to support the UBE and the other organizations in our diocese.
Thanks. And Hershey.
Good evening, everyone. I'm the Reverend Hershey Millette Stevens, Dean of the Chapel and Spiritual Life at St. Augustine's University in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I'm back in the diocese, which raised me up in the tradition of Henry Beard Delaney, hoping to build things brick by brick that, may not be perfect now, but, who says perfection must be our legacy? It is our work that we must do. So I am also here as a witness to the power of love, because Jean Corey, full transparency, is my aunt. And very early on in our aunt-niece relationship, she rescued me from a husband who was writing a theological thesis for James Cone. And I went to Harrisburg to record the stories of some of your parishioners there, to hear about their experiences of faith and race. And I would love to say that it was my bare curiosity alone that pulled me to Harrisburg, but it really was love. And Jean knows that I'll do anything for her. So I'm delighted to be here today to meet you all. And of course, always delighted to do whatever Aunt Jean says.
Well,
Hershey, can you just say she's also worked with the the storytelling project? Can you just say a little
Yeah,
bit?
so together with Dave Pritchard Smith, I developed the Beloved Community Story Sharing Campaign, which really was born out of my experience with Jean, you know, and hearing the stories there in Harrisburg. And maybe a little bit later, I'll share one of the most meaningful stories that I heard that weekend. And so the idea when we created the Beloved Community Story Sharing Campaign was just to get people talking about their faith, you know, because as Episcopalians, we are an embodied tradition. So, you know, it lives in our bodies, and we don't always talk about the ways that God has been and is present in our lives.
thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing that story because I think I know some of the people that you interviewed. So great. Well, Jean, give us a short introduction to yourself, and then if you would just launch right into a summary of some of the work that you've been doing.
And then I can share my screen.
Yeah.
Got so excited about that. I'm Jean Corey, and I actually have retired from Messiah University. I was the director of the Center for Public Humanities, and 7 years ago, Willie Jennings came and spoke at the school, and he really challenged us to think about the geographies of race. And he said, until you understand and you really embrace understanding the geographies of race, you can't really engage racial reconciliation. That racial segregation is spatial segregation. So he really challenged us to really dig, and that was the beginning of our work. And so our very first project, we had 3 churches in Harrisburg, and they were all African-American churches. We worked with Nick Peterson, who some of you know, and Emerson Powery also mentored the students that were working on the Episcopal, our Episcopal history. So, so this project has been, it's really, I have a lot of people to acknowledge. Katie Sutherland did a lot of research in the archives as part of a course that she was taking with us. It was Harrisburg history, and that was her project. Sarah Rathman was also working in the archives as she was working with the Center for Public Communities. So it's kind of fun that so many people touched this project. And so what I'm presenting is definitely not just my research, it's the collaboration of a lot of people. And as I was doing this research, Betsy was very kind, because I often would just pick up the phone and call her and just, you know, interrupt whatever she was doing to ask her, you know, about this and this. And as well as Bishop Baxter, I was not afraid to just butt into his space and get his, and he actually did an interview with a couple of our students. So it was really helpful having their background, and Betsy did a lot of research on the Episcopal Church and race, the broader Episcopal Church. So I'm sure she can share that, but I will. So I'll share my screen with you. I'm not very adept at this, and I don't know how this is going to go because I don't know what to do when can you see that screen? Yeah. Okay, but when I push present, I think you'll all be. I think you guys will go away, and that makes me nervous.
Well, we're still here. I'll let you know if we go away.
Oh, I can see you. That's what. Okay, close your eyes just a second. Okay. So I'll start with a quote by W.E. Du Bois, which is not encouraging. The Episcopal Church had probably done less for the Black people than any other aggregation of Christians. So that's what we're going to start with. That was 1903. And he was himself an Episcopalian. So I think he felt comfortable pointing fingers at the Episcopal Church. And that's a picture of St. Gerald's Episcopal Church it is no longer, but it was at 13th and Her. And you know, actually, people, a couple people on the anti-racism committee asked about this history, and it's really, it is the story. It's the story of oppression, but it's a story of resistance and resilience. And so, I think telling both of those stories at once is really important. I think it's important for us white people to think about how our whiteness and white supremacy shaped this history, but also so much to learn from these stories of resistance and resilience. So I'm going to start with not a good story, Richard Mcallister. And he was in 1850, he was a vestry member of St. Stephen's Cathedral. And he is the nation's most notorious slave commissioner. He bragged himself about returning more people to more fugitives have been remanded by me than any other U.S. commissioner. And then the Telegraph editor responded to something about him and said, you know, what's all the fuss? Why do you care about a couple of N-words? And so that's the kind of, that's 1850. And I don't think all of St. Stephen's felt like this. In fact, the story is that he was really disrespected by the church, but two vestry members were very public about their pro-slavery sentiment. And that kind of was the context of Central Pennsylvania. It was not pro-abolition at all. The Black churches here were very involved in the abolitionist movement, but it was not a strong abolition presence in terms of the white community. So we're going to fast forward. And I really think, you know, when I first started doing this history, we have done some other history since then. We worked with Linwood Sloan on the Monument Project. So we really were delving into 1850 to 1920. And as we were looking at 1920, I mean, the 1900 to 1920, I just was amazed at what a horrible period in our history that was. It was called the nadir of racial relationships. It was just, there was so much that that was awful for, especially in the North, as the Great Migration, as people were making themselves north, Central Pennsylvania was very hostile. And so I think that's important to keep in mind in this context. So in 1906, Mrs. Robert D. Washington, Susie, moves up from Baltimore, and she's from St. James, you know, one of the most vibrant African-American churches in the nation. And she says, there's no place for the Negro to worship here. And so she got in touch with with Bragg, her rector, and he immediately put things in motion. And so this was the beginning of the first African-American church in Central Pennsylvania. And it was called St. Monica's Guild. And this is where later on, I think Bishop, you know, it goes through lots of iterations: guild, mission, an official mission, and so all these different terms that are used. But the first name was Saint Monica, and I really love that that's the name that they chose for the first church. Then they call their first rector, and they meet in the home of Jane Chester, who's was herself, actually, she was a freedom seeker who landed in Harrisburg, and in her home, she entertained lots of abolitionists, and lots of different movements started in her living room. But her daughter, Eliza Zedricks, was part of the first movement to establish St. Augustine. So they met with them, and that was the beginning of their official establishment of the church. And then they moved. They have an official. Now they're a mission. They're no longer a guild, and they have St. Augustine's mission. And they meet in the Waiters Hall in the Old Eighth Ward. So if you can see this area right here, this is the Old Eighth Ward, It's the area right behind the Capitol. So if you can see, I mean, it's where the fountain is. That it's not very big, but it's very densely populated. There's lots of boarding houses, but that St. Augustine's Church is there, Wesley Union AME Zion, Capitol Presbyterian, and Bethany AME, Bethel AME, and they're all like a stone's throw away from each other. So they're all very close together. And we found lots of newspaper articles that showed that they were really engaged in working together, that they did fundraisers together. They had Vacation Bible School. They really were very involved in supporting each other's efforts and really challenging together just this terrible period of white violence in Harrisburg. They lay the cornerstone for St. Augustine at 13th and Kerr, but they get things rolling, and this is 1911. I don't think they ever finished building the chapel. This is 1911, and by 1917 they've moved away. But the same year, so I love thinking about this different backdrop to this. They have a women's auxiliary meeting, and they have the keynote speakers is the first white man that many of the peoples of the African jungles had never seen a white man before. This is from the newspaper article. Shana, you see this? This woman from St. James Lancaster and Miss Oxley speak about the work among the colored people, and Miss Gaither talks about the Indian school, training school at Carlisle. So and then these are become more official missions in the national church as well. But this gives you a sense of the way others were perceived and thought of in terms of what kind of agency they had and in the church. And then I just love this. This one of the first people that's baptized in the church is Lucy Oxley, who went on to get her degree from, she's the first woman to graduate, get her medical degree from this program in Cincinnati. And she gets all sorts of accolades, and there's a hall dedicated to her now. And then 1913, Frank Robinson, he works with 4 others to sue the Victoria Theater. So this is 1900 to 1920, all this that is going on. They have fundraisers they raise a lot of money. Marian Anderson comes to speak to make it possible to build their church. And then in 1918, the flu is just raging through Harrisburg, and one of the Pastor Parchment is, I love this beautiful tribute to him, but the colored troops in Marsh Run are just hit hard. I mean, actually, when we were doing this work on the monument, so many young people died of the Spanish flu, and it had really ravaged this Marsh Run, and he would go and minister to them all the time and not worry about his own health. And he was the only one that did that. So that was a letter to the editor about them. So then in 1918, this is very odd. All of a sudden, we found this letter, and it says the new St. Andrews of Harrisburg decides to build a mission church at 13th and Her, which is St. Augustine's, the chapel that was the African-American chapel. And they decided to build this mission. Now, we don't know, there's not much to construct this with this history, because this is December 1918, and in May, the African-American congregation has moved to Forrester and Calder. I don't know what happened between December and May, and I don't know how that all went down, but we'll get to that. So this is now it's a white mission, and the church the name is changed from St. Augustine's to St. Gerald's. I don't know if there's a. Do you guys all you priests here? Is there a St. Gerald? I've never heard of a St. Gerald. I think it's named after her son. That's
Yes, it is. This was. I'm going to share a little bit about that later, but it was named because of the grief of her child, and that was a part of the condition. She gave money so that it might be built there on 13th and Her.
So that was. You can fill this in. You know something that we don't know, which I can't wait to hear. So the congregation moves to Forrester and Cowden. I showed you that old 8th Ward area. That was decimated, but it was taken over by the state to build the Capitol complex, and the St. Augustine's moves out for a hot minute, not very long. This is just a couple years to 13th and Her, and then they're back at Forrester and Calder. But by this time, by 1918, the whole 8th Ward had been decimated, and all those churches had rebuilt in this same. A couple blocks over at Forrester and Calder, and again, they're all in the same neighborhood, very close, on the same block of each other. And so they continue their really robust relationship of working together. But so the state had taken over that, and now the state has and they moved to this area. They opened the new church, and it talks about all that they're doing together. This was actually in the same newspaper as the opening of the new church. It didn't have anything to do, but I just thought it was such an interesting backdrop to this new church is opening in the heat of Jim Crow law and lynching, and that is that there was a lot of migration, mostly to Philadelphia, but a lot of it coming to Harrisburg too. And it was not a safe place. It really wasn't. It was pretty violent, and they had to. There was no place for people to stay, so there was no. One of our students did a project on the Green Book in this area. So anyway, that's the backdrop of where these churches, how important it was for them to be that presence there. And then Tolly Caution comes to be the vicar of the Holy Church of the Holy Cross, and he is later becomes the first African American to serve on the National Church's Executive Council and the first secretary for Negro work. So he becomes very important in the national church, and is really the somewhat the grandfather of the Union of Black Episcopalians, because he was the executive secretary for racial ministries. And he does a lot of important work in working with other churches during this time. I just really love, I don't love, but I do love this. So the 1933 General Convention, the Oxley, who had been the rector at St. Augustine's, has gone on to Cincinnati, and they have their convention there, and the newspaper article said there were many contributions of Negro members of the church. But this is what Lawrence Oxley says at the same convention: brotherhood and goodwill when 12.5 million disillusioned Negroes in America cannot be expected to listen to a gospel of brotherhood and goodwill when they note the silence or apathy of the churches or brothers are lynched and discriminated against, and when they note that the Negro is made to bear many stripes, marks of inferiority. The acceptance of a Christian doctrine under those circumstances and conditions becomes increasingly difficult. The church mustn't come into a full realization of the economic plight of masses of Negroes, and be ever conscious and keenly alive that those factors which deny the Negro full opportunity to grow normally as part of our Christian civilization. This was almost 100 years ago. And look, we could say the exact same thing today in terms of the economic plight. In fact, that was part of the exhibit that we did that Kathy had designed. That timeline was just the housing and education disparities disparities in central Pennsylvania that have, that were really taking root in these state sanctioned displacements and redlining. So anyway, that I thought that was very sobering. Okay, the white, I'm gonna go real quickly. The white mission is closed, but this is sort of funny. Sarah Rathbun called me one time, and she said, one day in the middle of the day, she said, "Jean, St. Gerald's was a white church. It was a white church." And so we really had to do some backtracking here. But St. Gerald's is closed, and it says in the archives because they didn't pray enough. That's why they closed, because they didn't pray enough. But so they are closed, and then Holy Cross moves back to St. Augustine's, but their church is now called St. Gerald's. And it's at the same time that there are 3 public housing, much needed public housing in 1940 were built in Harrisburg, and William Howard Day, and there's segregated housing, that 2 were for white and 1 William Howard Day, the biggest one for 200 families, is built at 13th and Her. And so they think it's a good time to move back. I don't know who they is really. But the truth is that same neighborhood where Holy Cross was, by 1950, that neighborhood has also been taken over by eminent domain. And so all those churches are once again scattered, and most of them end up very close to one another again out by Downey School. Because of the displacement by the state. This is our mapping the divide. You can look at it one at sometime, but you see the red lining of the map. These are the neighborhoods. This is the very move that these churches took, this red space. So they moved, and there was ever shrinking area that they could be in. So so the real estate was definitely an issue. And in 1956, St. Gerald's was closed by the bishop, and in order to integrate, Father Dozier was offered to be assistant rector of St. Andrew's Parish, but he declines. And the members are encouraged to attend white Episcopal churches in the city. So we did get to interview Reverend Wagonseller's sons. So this information comes from Wagonseller's sons, that many were welcomed at St. Paul's, and actually there's several families that are at St. Paul's now that their families were at St. Gerald's, and they were pretty young, but they have some memories. So so anyway, they end up at St. Paul's. They don't find it quite so welcoming at the other churches, but some do go to the other churches and end up staying there. So this was from an article in a Black newspaper that a white Presbyterian church calls a Negro, and this is in the same issue. And then St. Gerald's closes, and so I don't know, and maybe this is something that you can answer, Bishop Baxter, is that was that an earnest decision about integrating? Was that what the Episcopal Church at large was doing at that time? And I don't know that, so you can weigh in on that. I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. This is from the Episcopal Archives. It's an exhibit, but you can see all the Black churches that are still in existence, Episcopal churches, and none in central Pennsylvania. They're all gone. But a lot on the East Shore, and a lot here in North Carolina. But so that was my very quick, not probably as quick as you'd want it to be, history. This is what I do want to end with this, though. I mean, this is the story, I love Kelly Brown Douglas, but she says, in the final analysis, whiteness is soul crushing. In an obvious way, it crushes the souls of those whom whiteness others, but uninterrupted whiteness overwhelms white people's very souls, foiling their ability to live into the urging of their better angels. So this story, you know, it centers the Black church and the Black experience, but it's also a story of uninterrupted whiteness in the Episcopal Church for most of the churches. So I guess I'm going to leave us with that.
Jean, that's just an amazing amount of work. Thank you so much for not just this presentation, but for I know the years of work that went into this. And I know that some of the time that I've been pawing through the boxes in the archives and trying to understand the difference and trace the development of St. Gerald's and St. Augustine's and back and forth. And it's really, really confusing. So.
Well, that, you know, I have a student that's finishing up her PhD, and she always talks about the terror of the archives for Black communities. And that is, I think that is the story of our church, because it is pretty skimpy to have to be able to reconstruct it. It's hard.
So I think at the center of all of this, details aside, is what I call state-sanctioned displacement, which is maybe a nice, tidy way to say it, right? But I'd love to have Bishop Baxter and Canon Ivy talk to us a little bit, because you are the native children of that area. And then
you had advised us around economy, so I don't think there's a lot. There are a lot of things there to pick up on, and I hope in a future time you will really allow Jean to have a session to share the research and work that's been done, because I think that you know, that's well, that's just an important piece. So I'm not going to say much, because I know we've got others here that have been invited to participate. Just two things that I would say. The one is about Black Episcopalians in central Pennsylvania. They were scattered. We talked about the Sea City, which is the capital, but throughout, including up in Bangor, Maine, and places like that, there were African Americans who worked for whites and out-migrated there or went to work in the mines. And in Bangor Church, I'm just going to give you an example. In Bangor Church, there is old Black Fred, and Father Shinneman has done a lot of research on that story. So they're scattered, and I've seen some as I've gone up into the north part of the diocese and been stunned to see folks and wonder how in the world they got there. They were mainly elderly. So there are a lot of stories, and I hope there will be time to more thoroughly share Jean's and also others. The other thing is that the abuse that African Americans have experienced in this diocese, I won't talk about the church, but in this diocese. And just one quick example, looking at what Jean has had to say. One of the things about in the name of integration is closing Black churches and telling them to join white churches. Yep. And some of that still goes on as such. And so the pain of those things represent that those who are Black Episcopalians really want to be Episcopalians. And I say that as someone who has had a lot of opportunity in the Episcopal Church, but I've always been questioned in this diocese and in other parts of the church, wanting to know, how did I get here? What did I do? It's sort of the affirmative action discussion. And so the piece of that is that as a community, Blacks are very loyal. They love the church. And even though they're fighting the issues of systemic and structural racism, there is a deep belief in the beloved community. And that in itself is a very difficult posture to maintain in one's soul, as well as in one's affiliation.
Yeah.
Wow.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Bishop Baxter was saying about the formation of our Black churches. The historically Black church, remember, the historically Black church was founded in the midst of deep, beyond what we can all imagine, hatred, white hatred. And that hatred was, we don't want you to come to our church so badly. Here's some money, go over there and build your church. Okay. And in the North, in the North, that had a different dynamic than it would have in North Carolina, where Hershey is. There's a different dynamic about forming a Black church even in rather southern Harrisburg. Yet and still that we, if you, and especially if you were of a Black church of a white church, like the Presbyterians, like the Episcopalians, like the Methodists, the mainline churches, you went to a historically Black church. It was, your church was founded based on the fact that you were not wanted in the white church. And so we have to remember that, yes, there is a resilience, but we have to remember that was the basis of the founding of them. And so for some Black folks, Black Episcopalians, leaving that tradition, there is a pride, and there is also saying we have moved on. So there's a dichotomy and feeling about the history of traditional Black churches.
Thank you.
I would love, Bishop Scanlon, just to have a second to thank Betsy for bringing that reality into the room. You know, we talk about the historically Black churches. I mean, even when I talk about St. Augustine's, which was founded by 20 white priests, and they gave scholarships to students, you know, and people want to celebrate, you know, like these white people cared about newly emancipated men and children and women, and wanted to educate them. And my question is, well, then why didn't they give them a scholarship to University of North Carolina? Because that would have been real reconstruction, right? Mm-hmm. And so they create this institution for Black people. And yes, Black people, we thrive. And, you know, I love the idea of, you know, helping people see that thriving and making the best and persevering, it goes with the struggle. And I just think about how our Black churches raise up ministers for the church. I am willing to take a poll that almost 80% of Black priests in this church came out of a Black congregation. We raise up ministers for our church, just like St. Augustine's formed ministers, priests, and I mean, Anna Julia Cooper, for example, she was a thinker for her time and for all people. I mean, and we're still wrestling with what she brought us in A Voice from the South. And so these institutions may have been given funds to be marginalized, right? Like from their very existence, like exist on the margins, but yet they raise up people for the entire church, you know, who bring unique knowledge about God, about perseverance, about the work of the Spirit, from those wilderness places, you know, if you will. And so, yeah, thank you so much, Betsy, I always find it hard to kind of like, how am I going to get this reality into the room? And so I'm so glad that you are also telling that story.
Thank you so much. Hershey, you had mentioned earlier that you had done some harvesting of stories from people at St. Paul's and up here in Harrisburg, and sort of whet our appetite, promising that you would tell one of those stories. I'm wondering if you would do that now.
Sure. You know, it's been so long, Jean, so you'll have to help me with the names, or the names may not be important, but I was at St. Paul and the women of the church had gathered to tell their stories, which is always such a gift because I feel like women hold the stories of a people. We remember all the things, you know, and I love telling the story, hearing the stories in a group context. Like usually with oral histories, it's kind of one-on-one, but we did this in a group context, and two of the women were related, and they were talking about how they were cousins, and they were talking about how one of the cousins got confirmed before the other. And so, you know, she talked about being jealous of her cousin's white dress and her beautiful gloves and her, you know, hat. And she got to go to church, you know, adorned as a little, you know, child bride, the way we used to dress up little girls for their confirmation. And so she goes through all of this and she says, I just remember when she came back to the pew, I said, open your mouth and breathe. And I said, well, why did you say that? She's like, I just wanted to smell Jesus. She's like, because, you know, back then they didn't let you have communion until you were confirmed. And so I just wanted to smell what Jesus smelled like. I can never tell that story without goosebumps, you know, because it kind of starts with the frivolity that people attach to preteen girls, you know, like the jealousy of her cousin's dress and clothing, and just ends with this longing that we do not think 12 and 13-year-olds can have for God. And it just reminds me, you know, that we don't know how the Spirit moves, and we can't ascribe, you know, a perfect time when people are ready to receive God. But I mean, by all accounts, the request confirmed her that day, right? You know, I just want to smell Jesus if I can't taste Jesus.
That's beautiful. So I'm wondering, we've spent quite a bit of time tonight. Obviously, this whole thing is centered around history. And we've had some comments on Facebook about why are we spending so much time looking at our history when we should be working for the future. I tend to believe, as I said it as we opened, that so much of the work of racial reconciliation has to include reckoning, coming to terms with our past. And yet I'm also very aware that we always regard our past with an eye to the future. And so, Shana, you served at St. Stephen's Episcopal Cathedral for a time as a curate, one of the churches to which these displaced congregants were recommended to go integrate. And I believe that the bishop even hired a Black curate to assist in that integration effort back in the day. And Bishop Baxter, you're currently serving as the interim at St. Paul's in Harrisburg. I'm wondering if we could shift the focus just for a minute or two to the current day. Are there continued expressions or conversation or understanding of this history in the congregations today at St. Stephen's and St. Paul's around this history that we're talking about? Shana, can you recall anything at St. Stephen's?
Wow. First, I just want to acknowledge Jean and that remarkable presentation. I was privately inboxing Bishop Scanlon that this entire hour could have just been spent on the presentation, and I would have been content with that. So I know that we're not going to resolve all of the world's issues and the issues of racism and racial terror lynching in the United States of America in the next 5 minutes, and as we see it in the church. But just to quickly highlight some of my experiences at St. Stephen's within the diocese, I had an outstanding experience at St. Stephen's Cathedral. Was it perfect? No. What I did encounter was a community striving toward excellence and trying to find ways in which to do the work of racial reconciliation. I do think that there is a general sentiment of people in general, and especially white people, thinking that why are we looking at the past? We should be moving forward. You know, we had the Black president. We had Nathan. we had a Black or a Black bishop in the diocese. Now we have a Black president. You know, we're making progress. We're like, yes, and I think a deeper way to take this conversation, and even in regards to St. Stephen's Cathedral, they have a school there, and it's about 50-50 mixed race, multicultural school. And I love the language around reconciliation because it deals more with relationships versus I would like to add on the conversation about reparations, which has more of the practical pieces and how we can actually invest dollars in helping to reestablish relationships and to do some of that reparative work that some people is whoever's commenting about why are we looking at our past. It's like saying, you know, why is someone who, if someone has been stabbed, why are they still in pain? You know, shouldn't they be healed from that by now? So I like to look at conversations around race, reconciliation, and reparative work from a practical standpoint. It's not a theoretical or philosophical endeavor, but rather it is boots on the ground, and how do we help heal communities and heal one another. So in order for us to go forward with a common cause, we have to pay attention to whatever baggage we are bringing into the field with us, because the pain and suffering from our past can either be what anchors us to our past, or it can be what propels us forward. So we can't do that type of work until we start speaking truth and having honest conversations. And it's never going to stop. We have to, as Jean highlighted in her presentation, the same exact words from 1933 applies today. And it's just, you know, we have to keep reminding ourselves as we heal forward. So I'll leave my comments there. And I know Bishop Baxter might have something to add.
Thank you.
I just want to ditto what Shana has said. It's not an either or. And the work of building a beloved community is hard work. It is only for those who are willing to engage hard work. If we do not know our history, and we see this now in the larger culture, because we have taken out things such as real civic history to understand what another version of the beloved community called democracy and civil society. We've taken out those things that give us knowledge of where we were coming from, what the intent is, but also civics that give us the tools to talk about and engage that e pluribus unum that we so often would like to talk about. And we're suffering from that, not simply because of what's going on now, because we don't understand how we got here. The other piece that I would say about a beloved community, the one is that it must be intentional. And wherever we are, we have to be intentional to build relationships, not necessarily buddy systems, but relationships that are intentionally to talk about one another's experiences as individuals and the communities from which we come. The second thing I would say is that there must be a willingness to be vulnerable. In South Africa during apartheid, there were certain privilege given, which they referred to as white passports. That was a euphemism for the fact that there were certain Blacks, often coloreds, but certain Blacks who could do certain things that other Blacks could not do. And we find a reversal of that, where there are whites who feel like that they have, as Betsy and Hershey have said, we've done some nice things for you. That should exonerate us. And that should make us different from others who were there. And if we enter into the intentional experience of being a beloved community, we should not be seeking exoneration, but mutual growth. And one final example I'll give of that, so much is said, and I have a lot of regard historically for Benjamin Rush. However, we tend to forget the racism that this man who was good at heart but could not see, and it was too expensive for others to point it out to him, how racism guided him. Everything from something as we might think is harmless as trying to cure Blackness. He believed scientifically that you could cure Blackness, like you could cure some skin ailment or whatever. And that he didn't understand the fundamentals of saying that Blackness was somehow inferior. If we could just take the Black off of them, then they could truly be integrated. And then he had a slave boy that he bought later in life that he did not manumit. But it's Black people, we don't talk about that because we don't want to discourage people from seeing this model of helping Absalom Jones and Richard Allen towards their fight for freedom for themselves and for their people. But if we really enter into a beloved community at a fundamental level, we also have to be vulnerable. I have to tell you my sins, and you have to also be willing to hear how I am seeing you, if indeed one wishes to grow. So I ramble on, but I think that the beloved community is something we as the church, it started out as a philosophical perspective, Roy and Spencer, but Martin Luther King grabbed it and gave it a very theological vision. And so somehow, if we can, in our personal lives, in our congregational lives, and our adjudicatory lives, if we can find ways to be intentional and open and honest and recognize that even though we may have made important contributions, that does not disabuse us of the subtle influences of racism.
Amen. You know, Nathan, I want to thank you, and you know, there are a few people in this diocese, and you are at the top of the list that I can speak really honestly and frankly with, and be vulnerable and make the mistakes that a white person's going to make in this conversation. And you and Anthony and Kevin Barron and Shana have been my go-to folks for this kind of really vulnerable conversation to help me learn and to help me grow. And so I'm grateful to you. I want to just share some of the comments that have been coming to us in greetings, because you haven't been able to see them. We've had quite a good crowd joining us tonight, including our brother Anthony, and Deb Dickinson, and Ellen Sweeney, and Ann Flynn, and Lori Kerr, and Anna Pruitt, whole bunch of people saying hello to us. Mary Novello, Elaine Austin, Nathan Soy, Debbie Miller, Michelle Hamilton, a really good group of folks from across the diocese. Randy Harris, Rebecca Myers, some of our beloved members of our diocese joining us. The feeling that I'm getting from the comments and from just my own heart right now is, wow, this is really just a beginning. I want to think of this as a taste of something bigger and longer and more substantial that we can and really need to do as we continue this work in the diocese. Sarah, you haven't had a chance to speak, and I think really our role tonight is to listen, but is there anything you'd like to say before we close?
No, other than just to say I'm just so grateful I was able to be here and listen, because the presentation and the discussion has been really wonderful, eye-opening, humbling, and I hear that work needs to be done, and the commission's working hard to try to follow your lead, Shana and Bishop Baxter and Reverend Hershey and Ivy. one of the things we've heard is that the history and the stories need to be collected and preserved. And that's one of the things that the Dismantling Racism Commission is working on. We're hoping to put together toolkits for everybody from school kids up to college kids, up to retired people and nerdy people who just like doing research, trying to put together some basic questions and structures that people can take back to their churches and start really digging into what the history has been in our diocese.
Thank you. Anna Pruitt says once a month for the rest of our lives. Are you all up for that? Once a month, but not on Wednesday nights, apparently. So, Jean, any closing thoughts from you? You're on mute, my friend.
Well, I'm not seeming very tech savvy, am I? I'm going to close with Willie Jennings' words because what? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Because my husband's yelling at me downstairs. And I think he's watching Facebook Live.
I was going to say, unlock the cellar door and let him up.
What Willie Jennings says, I think about this a lot, and we've talked about this so often in UBE and with the anti-racism committee, trying to figure out these different spaces. But where should we begin? Individually and collectively is reintroducing the church to the story of what it means to be a Christian, the constant entering into and becoming a part of other people's for the sake of love. Too many Christians talk about reconciliation while imagining themselves as centered hosts. And so I really want to consider what that means to be a decentered host. And I actually, all the people on this call here have been wonderful hosts to me. And often, Shane, and you will agree, I've remained at the center. And I have good friends that say, hey, you're in the center still. You need to move. And I appreciate it when people are honest with me like that. I am really thankful for the work that we did, really to discover the remarkable stories. And I think they offer us so much about thinking about our way forward as well. I mean, that's the beauty of this history is that they were meeting the same challenges that we continue to meet today. I didn't show you the slide where they're all getting together to protest lynching and to advocate for the anti-lynching bill that was just passed last week.
Yeah.
And this is 100 years ago. They were protesting and wanting that lynching bill to be passed. So, but anyway, thanks for giving us the time to have this discussion. I'd love to talk with these people all the time.
So if you could stop sharing your screen.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
There we go. Well, let's see all your faces before we say goodnight. I am really grateful to each one of you for being here, to Betsy, for Shana, for Hershey, for Sarah, for Nathan and Jean, for your wonderful, wonderful presentation. And I really do hope it can be a bigger thing, a more sustained project. So let me pray our closing prayer from our prayer book. This one is one of my favorites. It's for the human family. I bet you know it. So let us pray. Oh God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time, all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, thank you. It kept you a few minutes over our closing time, but I know we could talk all night. So thank you again so much. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Please do check our website for our 2 courses in Becoming the Beloved Community that are being offered through the Stevenson School. We have 1 and 2 now. We also have a couple of different short events featuring Carla Christopher, the Reverend Carla Christopher of the ELCA, who will be working with us on overcoming biases and building allyships and continuing our work in dismantling racism. So thanks again, and God bless you all, and have a great evening.